Hi again, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started just because there are 4 different presentations with 4 different student groups, and I'm going to make sure everyone gets a chance to present, and they've done a lot of work and put a lot of time into the presentations, and we want to be able to interact with those of you here in the room as well. So without further ado, as very many of you know, Social Work 408, which is Advocacy for Social Justice, the students as part of the Social Work Student Alliance take on advocacy projects, and these are the legislative advocacy projects that the students have been working on this semester. So why don't you go ahead and get started, the first group on bill number 243-36.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Diaz, for that introduction. Half a day, everyone. My name is Ariani Prue, and my group and I are one of the 4 social work students presenting our advocacy projects today. Before we begin, I would like to give the floor just really quickly to my group mates to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Kimela Babalta.
My name is Frankie Ann Beneventi.
Cecilia, my name is Tressa.
My name is Makaya Penafil.
Hi, my name is Daniel Salas.
With that said, our project is focused on Bill 243-36, which is relative to defining consent, revising the language of mentally defective to mentally impaired, and expanding the definition of mental incapacitation and physically helpless.
Over there in Casilia, my name is Tressa, and I'll be presenting on our advocacy goals. For our short term is to research the bill and gain an understanding, also to connect with the stakeholders about the bill, and meet and connect with Senator Torres, who's the primary sponsor for the bill. For our intermediate is to present our findings to a community forum and participate in public hearings. And for our long term is to see the bill come to fruition so there is clarity and expansion of term regarding consent, mental incapacitation, and physical helplessness, and raise public awareness. Next slide, please.
My name is Frank, and I'll be presenting on the history of the bill. Next slide, please. So, history of the bill. Public Law 1-45 introduces Guam Code annotated and different titles, where Title IX is identified for public safety, is signed and approved on July 2nd, 1952 by Governor Carlton Skinner. Public Law 15-60 is a public law that was repealed and reenacted, Chapter 25 in Title IX to the Criminal Correctional Code of Civil Procedures for the purpose of redefining sexual offenses and other purposes. And that was signed into law on August 31st, 1979 by Governor Paul M. Calvo. And then the current bill 243-36 talks about revising the language of the mentally defective to mentally impaired and expanding the definition of mental incapacitation and physical helplessness. And so with this bill, Senator Torres was the primary sponsor of the bill, and she also worked with AG's office. Next slide. So to reiterate, bill number 243-36 is an act to amend 25.10A, 25.15A, lines 4 to 7, 25.20A, lines 4 to 7, 25.25A, lines 3, and 25.38, line 2, all of Chapter 25, Title 9. Guam Code annotated relative to defining consent, revising the language of mentally defective to mentally impaired, and expanding the definition of mental incapacitation and physically helpless. Next slide.
So I'll be going over the key points of the bill. So what the bill does is that it identifies gaps inside the existing law where incapacitation actually falls short of complete unconsciousness. So that's in cases where the victim would go in and out of consciousness. and a victim that would actually consume intoxicating substances would not be considered incapacitated because in the actual bill, in the actual existing law, it states that a victim would need to be either secretly given or forcefully given intoxicating substances for them to be considered mentally incapacitated. So what this new bill does is that it expands on the definition of mental incapacitation and physical helplessness, and this includes voluntary intoxication under mental incapacitation and clarifies consent. Next. What we feel is that there was actually a rape case that happened last year that got national attention. So what happened was that in May of 2017, a female had drank 5 vodka shots and took a prescription medication. And then she went out with her friends. What happened is that when she was denied access to a club, a Mr. K invited her to a party. At this party, the victim actually passed out, and when she woke, she was being sexually assaulted by Mr. K. At the time, Mr. K was charged with third-degree sexual assault. But what happened is that 4 years later, just last year, the lawyer actually brought to the court saying that the victim had voluntarily taken intoxicating substances, so that does not categorize her as a victim. So the case was actually overturned. It was on CNN. It was on New York Times. It was all over. So what happened is that the court actually said that they see that this is an issue, but it was something that the legislature had to change. So 3 months later, in September of 2001, Minnesota legislature actually updated their criminal sexual laws. And you can actually see that other states also follow suit, like Arizona, California, Arkansas, and you can see Guam is on the path to actually trying to change that also.
Okay, so I'm going to be presenting on the DPD reported cases from 2015 to 2019. On a 2021 news article in the Post, the Guam Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Family Violence stated that 190 cases of sexual assault were reported in 2020, and it is estimated that 63% of cases are not reported. The chart on the right side is from the Guam Police Department 2019 Uniform Crime Report, and the ones in orange are cases of forcible rape, and the green bars are cleared by arrest. So as you can see, a good amount of cases are shown here, but only half or even less than half are cleared by arrest. And then like we said, or like I said earlier, it is stated that 63% of cases are not reported. So this is just a fraction of cases. Next slide, please. And moving on, we're going to be going over the advocacy of the bill. Next slide.
Hi, so I will be talking about the use of forums. So we had a Zoom meeting with Senator Torres, and we also had a meeting with Leilani Naholoa from Ali Shelter. We had a phone meeting with Ms. Karen Carpenter from Barrow. We had a meeting with the FSM consulate, and we had an email correspondence with Guam Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Family Violence. Next slide, please. So from the stakeholder findings, stakeholders who were at liberty to share their opinion were all in favor of the bill. Some stakeholders were notified of the bill, whereas others found out about this bill through the meetings with other organizations. So some stated that issues with sexual assault convictions in Guam was a systemic problem that has existed for years, and hopes this new bill will open a path to solving this issue. Next slide, please.
So I'll be going over the advocacy strategies and tactics. So we had used the collaborative strategy, and our tactics were to communicate and reach out to stakeholders of the bill. As mentioned earlier, Vero, victim advocates reaching out, Ali Shelter of Catholic Social Services, and Senator Torres, who is the primary sponsor. And we also conducted research on the history of the bill, related statistics, and studying the issue of wordings, consent, mental incapacitation, physical helpless, related to sexual assault. Next slide, please.
So I'll be talking about the advocacy challenges and next steps. So some challenges included some stakeholders not being able to provide their input or refraining from engaging in commenting about the bill when reached out to because of them being federally funded. COVID also restricted scheduling and appointments with stakeholders in person. So for the next steps, we plan to provide testimony at public hearings, gain support from other organizations to advocate for the bill, and to advocate for the legislature to pass the bill. Next slide, please.
Okay, and now I'll be presenting on the social worker perspective. Next slide. So for our social work perspective, we have found in the Social Work Speaks issue statements that have shown support for victims of sexual assault. Under crime victim assistance, NASW supports advocacy for individual victims of crime to help them overcome obstacles, barriers, and loopholes that may impede or prevent them from obtaining needed services. There's also self-determination of victims of crime in all situations, acknowledging the right of victims to define the harm done to them and the services that would be most helpful to them, regardless of the goals of the service program. And under the issue statement, women's issues, we have found that continued disparity between women and men, as far as safety reasons, that violence against all women, regardless of race, sexual identity, SES, or socioeconomic status, and other identifying characteristics. And one of the statistics we took out of that section was that one out of 5 women on a college campus experience a sexual assault. Next slide.
So these are our references. Next slide. And thank you so much for listening to our part of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys, for presenting. I just wanted to offer everyone, if they wanted to ask questions or comments about your presentations, you can go ahead and share it in the chat, or you can go ahead and turn off your mics and your cameras and go ahead and ask further questions.
I know you get questions from me all the time, but I'll go ahead and just ask a question, which is when you got to meet with Senator Torres, who's the primary sponsor of the bill, what was that like for you, and what was something new that you learned from your meeting with her about advocacy?
Honestly, it was kind of nerve-wracking because, like, you see senators, like on the news and stuff like that, but when you're actually, knowing that you're interacting with them, it was kind of nerve-wracking. And when she was talking about the bills and stuff like that, it was interesting how she was saying that they got together with the AG, and then they had to actually look through the laws to see if that they could actually, it would, change it so that it would matter and stuff like that. Ari, would you?
Yes, I would say same for me. It was intimidating at first, but it was very interesting to be able to be in that environment with her and her staff. Although it was a virtual environment, it was an experience as a social work student, and then also seeing the senators work out in the field. Like Daniel mentioned, meeting the AG's office. Oftentimes we don't really see the senators unless they're on the news or anything like that. So it was a great experience to meet with her virtually and get her opinion on the bill.
Thank you. I think if there aren't any other questions, just because of time, if it's okay, we'll move on to the next. Nice job, everyone.
Half a day, everyone. My name is Leilani Delgado, and along with Gabrielle Ujoa and Talisa Kekis, we will be presenting social work salary increase. Next slide.
Today, we'll be discussing the draft bill known as the Social Worker Recruitment and Retention Act of 2021. Next slide, please. The bill was drafted in the summer of 2021 by Vice Speaker Tina Rose Munya Barnes' office. So Vice Speaker Barnes had felt that social workers were also in need of a pay raise, as social workers were also essential frontliners during the pandemic. The hope was that this bill would encourage retention and recruitment of social workers, as many agencies were and are experiencing difficulties in this area. She had modeled the draft bill after Bill 6136, also known as the Nursing Recruitment and Retention Act, which had been sponsored by Senator Mary Camacho Torres, Vice Speaker Barnes, and Senator Amanda Shelton. In June 2021, Governor Lou Leon Guerrero had signed her concurrence that had given nurses a 15% increase in their base salaries, with differential pay ranging from 10% to 25% starting in August of 2021. Next slide, please. Currently, social work students are required to intern at an organization for 210 hours in their senior year. So this would require students to dedicate about 16 hours of their week in order to complete the 210 requirement before the end of the semester. A few of these internships do give students a stipend, but it is common that social work students do go unpaid. The draft bill proposes the development of a pay scale for UOG social work student interns. So students who intern at a government of Guam agency or a non-government agency that provides needed services on Guam would be paid for the 2 semesters they are there. It also proposes a 15% salary increase for social workers in the government of Guam. The bill was introduced to encourage certification for Guam social workers, implement a wage increase for social workers, and to provide income stability to students during their final practicum. Next slide, please.
Half a day, everybody. So let's talk about the concerns that we had with the draft bill. So our main concern was that the draft bill, the 15% raises are conditional, and that means that it will be based on certifications. These certifications that were on the draft bill are not exactly applicable to Guam. Some of the examples of the certifications on the draft bill include the Advanced Certified Hospice and Palliative Social Worker, Military Service Members, Veterans, and their Families Social Worker, and the Certified Children, Youth, and Family Social Worker. It is important to note that the NASW Guam chapter requested that the Vice Speaker's office does remove these certifications so that it is more aligned with local requirements. Next slide, please.
We had an interview with Dr. Lisa Natividad. Here are some points made during our meeting regarding salary increase. Those who hold certain certifications or credentials would potentially receive higher salaries. When licensure with the Guam Board of Allied Health Examiners is in place, this gives reason for higher salaries, and licensure creates consumer and title protection. With consumer protection, it sets a minimum standard for practicing social workers, and with title protection, it would protect the social work title. The Bachelor of Social Work Division at the University of Guam welcomes paid internships for students. Next slide, please.
Now we have these social work salaries in the United States. It is important also to note that these social work salaries do vary depending on the geographic location, education obtained by the individual, and that person's specialization or area of practice, whether this be mental health, drugs and alcohol, healthcare, education, and so forth. So the state takes into account the cost of living in that state, the demand for the social worker, and also the job growth rate. So these are all variables that dictate what the salary of the social worker looks like. Of course, with higher education does result in higher pay. So on average, an individual with an MSW will make about $13,000 more than an individual with a BSW. And then following that, an individual with a DSW or a PhD and also practicing social work will make about $20,000 to $25,000 more than an MSW holder. Next slide, please. So here we kind of broke down the salaries for social workers in the United States. We can see here that the national average for child, family, and school, healthcare, mental health and substance abuse, and all others are listed here. Among all of these four, it is seen that the mental health and substance abuse is among the lowest paid nationally, and all others is paid higher. So all others can include international social workers who work for federal agencies or the federal government in the US, but are based other places other than the US, or also social workers that work for the United Nations. It is also important to include that all four of these states here do have a higher cost of living. So that also ties into the geographic location of the salary. Next slide, please. Here we do have the NASW findings. So in 2015, the National Association of Social Workers conducted research, and they found that the median annual salary for an undergraduate degree holder, so this is a Bachelor of Social Work, was about $48,000. The highest median salaries for MSW, PhD, and DSW holders also varied among specialization. And here again, we see that national security and international affairs is among the highest at $69,000 a year. Again, individuals who are employed in national security, international affairs could be foreign service social workers. And that also means that they are in a higher risk area, which results in adding additional to their higher pay. Individuals and family services is the largest single setting where individuals with an MSW make up 31% of the workforce, and their salary average is $45,000 per year. So similar to a gap that we found in researching Guam's social work salaries, there's a lack of data for individuals who have degrees or education in social work, but they are not employed under a social work title or position. So this could include program managers, teachers who do teach social work, and project coordinators, and etc. Next slide, please.
Here's a table of the Guam salaries for social workers in 2020. This was pulled from the Guam Department of Labor's Employment and Wage Estimates for May 2020. The 25th percentile represents the 25th percentile of wage distribution. The 75th percentile represents the 75th percentile of the wage distribution. We found that the lowest paid social work field on Guam on average was the child, family, and school social workers at $28,008. And the highest paid social worker field were all others at $34,429. And we also included the average wages in comparison to the US. So on Guam, for child, family, and school social workers on average, it is $32,762 in comparison to the US, which is $49,488. In the healthcare field on Guam, it's $49,537. Meanwhile, in the US, it is $57,704. Within the mental health and substance abuse field, Guam is $45,515 in comparison to the US at $49,151. And all others on Guam are at $53,805. Meanwhile, in the US, they're looking at $60,596. Next slide, please. In May 2010, the government of Guam and Hayes Group conducted a study to analyze the classification, job evaluation, and compensation practices of GovGuam. Their aim was to redesign GovGuam's job evaluation and pay plans. When analyzing social work salaries within GovGuam's staffing patterns for fiscal year 2022, we did find that GovGuam does follow the recommended general pay structure that was found in the recommended salary plans from the Hayes study. So a social worker 1 will start at grade L, and the minimum salary is about $37,100, and their maximum pay would be about $55,650. Social worker 2s will usually start at grade M, and their minimum would be $40,762, and their max would be $61,143. For a social worker 3, their grade step would be an N, and their minimum starting would be about $45,014, and their maximum would be about $67,522. Next slide, please.
For social work pay raise in the US recently, in California, social workers who are included in bargaining unit 19, represented by the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, received a 5% salary increase on July 1st, 2021, and will receive another 2.5% increase on July 1st, 2022. In Kentucky, social workers who took action with faced issues were heard by lawmakers. For this, state social workers received a 10% raise in December of 2021. Next slide. Here are our advocacy goals. Our short-term goal is to present nationwide data on social work salaries, local data on social work salaries, information obtained from stakeholders on paid internships, and current pay raises in the US to NASW to present to Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz-Barnes. Our intermediate goal is to review the second draft bill and give feedback. Then provide testimony when the bill is assigned to committee in the legislature. Our long-term goal is the implementation of social work salary increases and social work student paid internships. Next slide, please. This is our advocacy strategies and tactics. We will be using a collaborative strategy by conducting research on national and local statistics on social work salaries and develop a fact sheet of data and information to distribute to lawmakers and stakeholders. Next slide, please. Moving forward with challenges and next steps.
So the main challenge that we found with this project that we conducted is that the social worker label in Guam, again, similar to the gap that the NASW in the United States found, is that it was difficult to locate all social work salaries through staffing patterns that are publicly available. And this is based on that some individuals who are social workers and do have social work education were not employed under social work titles. And then the second challenge that we found is that the draft has not been updated, so it has been stagnant.
Lastly, these are steps we will be taking to directly contact the Vice Speaker's office for the draft bill. Second, we will create a fact sheet of data and information to distribute to lawmakers and stakeholders and to provide testimony at a public hearing. Next slide, please. These are our references. Next slide. Thank you, and this concludes our presentation. Sidu Asmaasi.
Thank you so much, guys, for presenting. We will now move on to questions. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and turn off your mic and go ahead and ask questions. But if you are nervous to share a question over the mic, you can go ahead and send it through our chat, and I can go ahead and ask questions.
Can't be the only one asking questions. Like I said, these guys hear from me.
Awesome job, awesome job. I can go if you want. My name is Rose Regis. I'm the social worker and the social worker of the year. But I was also a part of the Hayes study way back. And I'm still working, and I still feel that we're underpaid, and for everything that is needed out in the community, the first person they would try to get the services through is the social worker. I know the limitations of our at Guam behavioral in regards to our psychiatrists, and now a lot of our clients are just reaching to just counselors. And who are they? Social workers. So, you know, being in the Child Protective Services, I've been there for most my professional life as a social worker, at CPS, as an investigator. I can even do my intake and investigation and case management at the same time because we're so short, but it should be separated in each unit. But for the factors that every senior worker, I mean, all realistic putting it out is that we're just going to do what we have to do. And it's unfortunate that some social workers they apply, but sometimes the realistic part of being in the government, and this is just part of government, is we have to advocate because we see the unjust as well within our profession. Some do take the factor that we do talk to senators for many years. I have expressed, and most of them will say, I don't know how you do the job. And then some social workers will say, I would never, I can't be working in child welfare. It's just intense. The 24/7, 7 days a week, I raise my children. My children are social workers too. I'm shocked that they're going into it, but I am still blessed. I love what I do. But I do feel that I'm still in the game and nothing much has changed. And I kudos to you guys if we do push, this and to be heard and to rise up and advocate for our profession. You're the next in line. And I wouldn't want you to have to fill that same percentage that I have dealt with for almost 2 decades. So, if you want, I think it's just getting everybody all together and being at the legislature and demanding, because at this point, law enforcement, yes, they're hurting, but we pretty much serve the community through mental health, through emotional breakdown, through struggles, to domestic violence, to family violence. My job here now, I'm the first social worker at Public Defender in a holistic, way of advocating for those who are in the system. But what brought them into the system? It's a lot to do with family and brokenness and addiction. And the majority of people who serves that are social workers. So we really have to take, pride in that, in a sense, be humbled, because that is part of our core here, but advocate for ourselves. We advocate for our clients. It's time to make this change happen. It is squeezing so much of us to retire because due to the pandemic, due to the critical need of, services to provide to our community in a small island. We definitely need to rise up, because we will do it. I will do it 24/7. But it's just not about the money, but it's realistic because we still have to survive. And so I hope we can push that, and I'll be right beside you. Just still doing it until, I'm not looking towards retiring, but it's what I came into the field for. So keep continuing. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experience. We actually appreciate that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Rose. So we do have questions inside the chat. So I'll go ahead and start from Eric Borja. Do you think our political status has anything to do with why pay here on Guam is lower with our rising economy?
Hi, Eric. Oh, go ahead, Lonnie.
No, go ahead.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for your question. Hi. So with the rising economy and our political status, we actually don't have too much information regarding the pay raises, especially because this is a draft bill. But we can take your question down. And if we do find something out, we could also contact you outside of the conference. And then anyone else who is also interested in that same question.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. So this one's from Leilani. A large number of social workers are employed for nonprofit organizations, and the bill supports government employed social workers. How could the bill be inclusive for all social workers?
Thank you, Ms. Leilani, for your question. I see that Ms. Jamila also responded to her question in the chat. She mentioned that we hope that it could be written into the revised version. And this topic is actually on the NASW's radar. So because, again, this is a draft bill, there is a lot more work that has to be put into it. So kind of by conducting this research and presenting this, we're actually able to bring more concerns towards that bill for revision.
Okay, if we have no more questions, we can go ahead and move on to the next presentation. But once again, thank you, Eric and Leilani for asking those questions. And once again, thank you, Ms. Rose, for that insightful comment.
And half a day, everyone. My name is Stephanie, along with my group members, Ms. Brianna, Ms. Alexine, and Ms. Katie. We'll be discussing our legislative advocacy around Bill number 244-36, which is the Survivor Bill of Rights Act of 2022. We will be talking about the history of the bill, some background on the issue, advocacy, and tactics that we use throughout the process, and a bit more. Next slide, please.
So Bill number 244-36 is an act to add a new chapter 163 to Title 8 of the Guam Code Annotated relative to establishing a Bill of Rights for victims of sexual assault and to further citing this as the Survivors Bill of Rights Act of 2022.
Thank you, Bree. So before we get to the history of the local bill, we actually found that Bill 244 has a federal legislation companion, so they are basically similar in nature. Bill 244 is modeled after HR 5578, which is the Survivors Bill of Rights Act of 2016, which was introduced by Representative Mimi Walters and Representative Zoe Lofgren on June 24, 2016. It was then passed by the House on September 6, 2016, and then subsequently passed by the Senate on September 28, 2016. In terms of how legislation goes, this piece of legislation went very swiftly and quickly throughout the process, so much so that it was actually signed into law in the same year by President Obama, as seen in the photo. It is now known as Public Law 114-236. Next slide, please. This is a small Aussie. So a summary of the local bill, Bill 244. It was actually first introduced by Senator Camacho Torres on January 26, 2022. This bill is the first of its kind in any of the legislatures. So we know of bills that have been reintroduced across multiple terms, but this is the first of its kind. It was subsequently referred to the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, Culture and Tourism on February 1st, 2022. And upon meeting with the senator, it was introduced to ensure that victims have the fundamental right to advocacy. And if passed, this bill proposes to encourage victims to proceed with their complaints, along with providing protection and rights that the other crime victims receive in the criminal justice process. This bill ensures that victims know they won't suffer discriminations with these rights in place. It also ensures that these victims maintain dignity and privacy throughout the investigation process, along with the absolute baseline that their allegations will be taken seriously. Next slide.
Good day, everyone. I'll be presenting the background on the issue of the bill. So one of the issues that is a factor in proposing Bill 244 was the rise in sexual assault cases. According to GPD, there has been 116 reported cases in 2019. And in 2020, there were 190 reported cases of sexual assault. The bill is victim-centered and will allow retention for past victims and survivors where no prosecution has been initiated to seek justice and confidence with the respect and dignity they deserve. As stated by Senator Camacho Torres, victims of sexual violence are more likely than other crimes to be blamed for the crime, assumed to be fabricating the crime, or taken less seriously than their injuries warrant. Next slide, please.
So the data and statistics on the issue. Bill 244-36 is designed to assist victims of sexual violence to ensure they have the right to justice and to receive help even if the abuse goes unreported. The bill also aims to promote survivors' access to necessary services and increase awareness about the impact of sexual violence. So our local data. Guam has the second highest number of sexual assaults in the United States capita. There's about 64.2 reported rapes per 100,000 people. According to the Guam Coalition Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault, the percentage of cases against minors has risen to 75% in 2020, and it's estimated that 63% of sexual assaults in Guam are not reported to the police. So the impact of the United States. Only 310 cases of 1,000 are reported to the police, and 28 cases lead to a felony conviction, with 50 reports leading to an arrest. Out of 1,000 of these cases, 975 perpetrators walk free. About 90% of victims are women and girls, and 10% are men and boys. Globally, about 1 in 3 women have been subjected to sexual and physical violence, and about 1 in 6 men have been affected by sexual abuse.
So for our advocacy goals, as a group, we worked collaboratively with brainstorming and establishing our short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals. Firstly, our short-term goals were to 1, gather statistics on survivors and victims' cases on Guam. 2, obtain information about rights pertaining to sexual assault victims. 3, determine or identify what is going to be published on a notice of rights. And 4, contact Senator Torres and Speaker Terlahi. Second, our intermediate goals were to 1, contact potential stakeholders not indicated in the Survivors' Bill of Rights and seek comments. 2, develop a flyer containing information and rights. 3, provide testimonies at public hearing. And for our long-term goals, it's to 1, for Bill 244-36 to be signed into law. 2, identify how the law affects current procedures and if it has any effect on existing sexual assault cases. And 3, encourage organizations and agencies to revise their SOPs to include proposed procedures in support of the bill's Survivors' Bill of Rights. Next slide, please.
So the advocacy strategies and tactics that our group used was collaborative, and we did this through conducting research and study on the issues. We gained stakeholder comments, and stakeholders included GPD, DART, Guam Coalition, Vero, and Catholic Social Services. And third, develop a fact sheet.
And that was just, so we actually collaborated with the previous group, Bill 243, and we actually had a joint meeting with Senator Camacho Torres on International Women's Day. Next slide, please.
So these were our challenges regarding the advocacy process. So we had to make time in our schedule to contact the legislator and schedule a meeting with Senator Torres. And we also had to brainstorm the questions we can use to approach these stakeholders. And it was very intimidating having to approach these stakeholders and the different agencies about the stance on the issue.
This is Masi. So moving on to the social work perspective, we actually attach an excerpt of the bill here. And as social work students, we do recognize that this bill supports and empowers sexual assault victims during one of the most difficult times of their life. We recognize that this bill directly relates to our NASW Code of Ethics, which is social justice and dignity and worth of a person. We are in support of social justice for all survivors and to make certain that victims are treated with care and respect throughout the entire investigation process. Next slide, please.
So this is a continue of the social work perspective. Lastly, we recognize that this bill relates to Social Work Speaks Crime Victim Assistance Policy. The National Association of Social Workers supports the following policy statements below: to provide the best services and support culturally competent practice when working with victims of crime, advocacy for individual victims of crime to help them overcome obstacles, barriers, and loopholes that may impede or prevent them from obtaining needed services, and to provide self-determination of victims of crime in all situations, acknowledging the right of victims to define the harm done to them and the services that would be most helpful to them, regardless of the goals of the service program.
Those are our references. Next slide. Tazos Maasi, Salamat, Sulang. Any questions for us?
I know that we've talked about this in class, and your long-term goal is if and when the bill comes into law, because it creates a survivor's bill of rights, and Senator Torres has worked with the AG on this primarily. But out in the field for social workers, how do you envision that a survivor bill of rights can impact our work and impact those who are affected by sexual assault? How do you think it will be used in our field?
Hi, Dr. Diaz. Thank you for that question. I can try to give it an answer. So I think it can definitely empower victims to come forward, knowing that they're going to have more protection in place, more of these rights that their complaint will be taken seriously. I think in the previous slides as well, we know that victims have to face this stigma with reporting, and legislation like this and legislation like Bill 243, they just empower these victims. And that's something that social work is kind of rooted in most of the times, is empowering victims, allowing them to make choices on their own, self-determination, dignity and worth of a person, and social justice especially. Thank you.
Well, for the most part, I'll give a little input. I like going back into child welfare. I was mainly chosen to investigate sexual abuse cases. And so that's majority of my field is sexual abuse cases. And so a lot of times during the process of the criminal charges, you got two sisters who are victimized by one perpetrator, and the government had the audacity, a sense, to come into terms, thinking that the victims, because of the fact that they're young, they are also traumatized by, going on the stand and not really looking at it, and then just giving it a case of giving the term only 5 years. And they've been victimized since maybe 10, 15 years in the making. The girls are about maybe 3 more years to be of age. As an adult, he'll be out again. And, what is there for them? And I still want to advocate for these children that are now becoming adults, because their perpetrator are also family members. And the factor is that the majority of sex offenses are on children. I'm on the other side now. It's kind of, a lot of people would say, well, why aren't you the attorney general? Being a public defender, we also have to help out and find ways to give treatment to those who are perpetrating. And a lot of times they were also just as well victims as in their childhood. So, and that's where we also look at is the fact there's no treatment for sex offenders, as much as emphasis on sex offenders. In realistic, what I know from being in that field, our clients who were children and victims, they become perpetrators themselves. And I have taken children who were victims and became pedophiles. So I also transported them off island for treatment, because there's no treatment here. Guam Behavior will say we can't treat because we don't have, we don't focus on that. So we always send most of our kids off island. But the factor is we do have so much high rate of sex offense against children in child wealth in CPS. And the news, you can see that in the news every time you look at the news. But the fact is that once we go through the treatment, a lot of times when they go to treatment and counseling, they have not reached addressing the trauma. It takes time to address the trauma. So they still need counseling, and they still need, and then at the time, a lot of our perpetrators, if you have a good attorney and you got and you gather good enough evidence as a good worker, a social worker. A lot of the times is a CPS worker who has the most information to keep the case solid, to get the clients to feel comfortable enough to trust the system to work for them. So and I had a case where the perpetrator had 3 life terms because of the fact you have to advocate, you have to continue to show them, to help these clients heal. And that's the journey that they're gonna have to be. And it takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of dedication and treatment to help these individuals. That this law, this bill is definitely the extra that we have to do for these survivors. You know, for the most part, because a lot of times, a lot of them turn into addiction, and it just becomes a cycle. And then I hear it because I'm still in the game and still in the field of social work, and it's now a different generation. They're now parents, and then dealing with the fact of having children and going through the same situation. And that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Rose, for all those great insights and comments. Really much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys, for presenting, and thank you, Ms. Rose. That was very deep. I was even getting goosebumps on this side, you know, and it takes, you know, a lot to be a social worker. So that's why props to you and to all of you guys presenting and majoring in social work, because it is a lot to intake.
Oh, we can't do this alone. We need each other. So definitely it's a beautiful thing, just even having this conference and sharing each other's goals and thoughts and the realistic of what's going on.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Okay, we can go ahead and move on to our last presentation. If there are no questions.
Half a day, everyone. I'm Euphemia Artero, and my partner's name is Leticia Aguilar. Our advocacy project focuses on the legislative initiative to modify the drug felon lifetime SNAP ban. Next slide, please. The law that places the ban is entitled, next slide, please. The law that places the ban is entitled Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, also known as Public Law 104-193, and Section 115 is the denial of assistance and benefits for certain drug-related convictions. Next slide, please. The enactment of the 1996 Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act took place under President Bill Clinton's administration. The prompting behind the act was to place limits on welfare eligibility. Section 119, which is a section that bans drug felons from receiving SNAP and TANF benefits, was specifically placed in the act because of the issue of the war on drugs at that time. Although it is a federal law, it does allow for states to individually opt out of the ban or create modifications at their discretion. Next slide, please. The act imposes a lifetime ban on SNAP and TANF for individuals who have been convicted of a drug felony, regardless if they have time served or are still serving time. In Section 115 of the act, it says, an individual convicted under federal or state law of any offense which is classified as a felony by law of the jurisdiction involved, which has an element of possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance as defined in Section 102 of the Controlled Substance Act, shall not be eligible for supplemental nutritional program and temporary assistance for needy families. Next slide. There have been many effects due to the ban. Banning individuals with drug-related felonies makes their re-entry to society even more difficult and increases the rate of recidivism. The Bureau of Justice Statistics found that within 5 years of release, 3/4 of individuals without access to SNAP or TANF will return to prison. A 2010 study found that individuals released from prisons in California, Connecticut, and Texas who suffered from food insecurity were more likely to use illegal substances and become sex workers. In an article published by Class entitled "No More Double Punishments," a Kansas father who committed a drug-related felony at the age of 18 is now facing a double punishment as his son was diagnosed with cancer and he had to resign from his job to care for his son, but could not apply and get the SNAP benefits because of a drug-related felony he committed at 18 years old and served time for. He stated in the article that it is easier for him to purchase a firearm with his drug-related felony than it is for him to get SNAP benefits. On a local level, the Guam Pacific Daily News published an article about a local man who was convicted of a drug felony in 2009 and has completed substance use treatment and is now a peer specialist, but is still being punished as a felony as he is unable to receive SNAP benefits and struggles to put food on the table for his family. Next slide, please.
Okay, so these are some key issues that we found on the ban. So first of all, it significantly poses a barrier to reintegration into society, as well as promotes food insecurity and malnutrition. Additionally, during the course of time spent in prison, there's the potential to run up debt, including legal fees, restitution, criminal fines, child support, arrearages, etc. And after release, most of the earnings may go to paying off these fines and these fees, which leaves minimal to no funds available for basic needs such as food. And then sometimes, or a lot of times actually, there are individuals convicted of a drug felony who had no prior criminal records and who are not high-level drug dealers, but one conviction bans them for a lifetime from benefits, while those who have been convicted of more violent crimes such as murder are immediately eligible for such benefits after release.
On Guam, the act is still in full effect. Individuals who have been charged with a drug-related felony are still banned from receiving SNAP. A newspaper article was published shining light on the issue that is still current on our island, while many other states have modified or opted out of the ban. The initiative to make the modification to the ban on a local level has been a long time coming, and now is being spearheaded by the Guam Department of Public Health and Social Services under the Division of Public Welfare, Bureau of Economic Security. From there, a work group was formed to gather information and data regarding the ban and how Guam can work towards modifying the ban with the research found. The work group consists of different agencies, which include the Guam Court System, Probation and Parole, the Office of the Public Defender, the Department of Corrections, Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, and the Office of the Attorney General. Many of you are in the room today. Next slide, please. The work group formed has been working to collect data and research to present a solid initiative to the legislature in hope of creating a bill and possibly a public law that will modify the ban. Some of the local initiatives that have been done within the work group to collect data are the collections of testimonies from the RSAT program, which is the Residential Substance Abuse Treatment for State Prisons. The federal law has been reviewed and the modifications within different states have been researched and reviewed, finding which would best fit Guam's modification and how we can proceed with these modifications. Flowcharts from the Guam Court, specifically the Adult Reentry Program, has been collected to see how the process goes when an individual is first charged with a felony, all the way to what may follow after the individual is released. Next slide, please. Thank you. The modifications made nationwide have varied, but most of them have similar modifications, such as the submission to drug testing, participation in substance use treatment, making a distinction between possession and distribution for eligibility, creating a period of time after conviction or release for ineligibility, disqualifying an individual after a certain amount of convictions, and disqualifying an individual if they have violated the conditions of parole or probation, and allowing individuals to be eligible if the crime committed did not cause loss of life or physical injury. Sorry, Letitia, is the slides able to go back up?
Letty, do you want me to share slides?
Yes, please, sorry.
Thank you. Some states such as Nevada and Kentucky have made modifications that have allowed for pregnant women to be eligible for SNAP on all accounts. Arizona has the amount of time for ineligibility at the discretion of the court and the cases. 23 states have already opted out fully of the ban, and the rest of the states have made modifications with the exception of South Carolina and Guam.
So these are some data that we found from studies done in the US. So a prison policy initiative study showed that 76% of formerly incarcerated people described finding work as very difficult or nearly impossible. And if they did, median earnings were about 20% below the federal poverty line. In 2018 in the US, it was found that 26% of incarcerated women were convicted of a drug offense compared to 13% of men, which meant that women were more likely to be convicted of a drug felony. 60% of women in jails and 80% of women in prison have dependent children, presenting the added pressure to plead guilty of a drug offense for a lesser sentence. A study conducted with women that had drug convictions or prior charges indicated that 92% of the women claimed that even if they knew about the lifetime ban, it would not have acted as a deterrent during active addiction, which kind of just reiterates how the ban hasn't really been effective in addressing substance use issues. Felons recently released from prison are less likely to return if provided full public assistance benefits. And then a Harvard Law study found that access to SNAP and TANF significantly reduced an individual's risk of being incarcerated by up to 10% within 1 year. And then we kind of honed in on statistics for women here. And the reason for that being that the vast majority of recipients for SNAP and TANF are women and their children. And on a side note, it would be useful to take this into account when we consider the foster care or the children in the foster care system or children in group homes or treatment facilities who want to reunify with their parents or other family members, and how this ban presents an added barrier to reaching those goals. Next slide, please. These are our advocacy goals, short term, conduct research on the key issues and collect data on the different modifications nationwide. Our intermediate goals was to help identify funding sources for drug testing and treatment if it is a part of the modification. And then for our long-term goals, we want to help draft a bill to modify the ban locally. For our strategies and tactics, we used a collaborative strategy in working with other agencies, as Mia had mentioned earlier, such as public health, the probation office, public defender. And we're looking at doing research on modifications done nationwide, which is what we're presenting here. And then we're also looking at holding forums with stakeholders, gaining testimonies from individuals who are drug felons, and then presenting these modifications to the legislature, specifically the Honorable Speaker Therese Turlock. For some of our challenges and constraints for this project, it is still in the very, very early stages of the initiative. So we're still trying to research and gather data. There's a lack of local data. We have conflicting schedules for team members to meet. We understand that everybody is busy and has a lot of work to do. And, you know, in regards to working with different agencies, it's been a bit hard to come together and compile the information each agency has gathered. And then we've also had some difficulty in accessing some public laws nationwide. Next slide. Our anticipated challenges to the modifications is that we anticipate public stigma on drug felons and addiction, the cost of drug testing if it is to be added into the modification, and then tracking the compliance of the clients between agencies. Next slide. From a social work perspective, as a discipline rooted in helping individuals and communities have access to basic needs and achieve overall quality of life, the lifetime ban on SNAP and TANF benefits for drug felons goes against what we as social workers strive for. The SNAP and TANF benefits are public welfare, and it is our job to ensure that people have access to such welfare. Our core values of service, social justice, dignity and worth of a person, and the importance of human relationships emphasize the dire need to address this lifetime ban. As social workers, we do not discriminate between who deserves help and who does not. To do so would be unethical and would question our integrity as professionals. And these are our references. Thank you. Any questions?
I will jump in. I'm part of the initiative program, and actually I got you guys to come in and help out with the team. So thanks to Dr. Diaz for getting you guys to come in, the young students. It's very challenging, especially you're looking at being the social worker to help in that situation. It's like twofold, because I was during CPS, I would advocate for unification. And it's hard to reunify if they're banned, if the mother is banned. She's done her classes, she's done her treatment. That is the only thing that's holding me. And that's also not including the SNAP and the benefits of that, of public health, but also in housing of GORA. But GORA can change it under the HUD, because I'm part of the Guam Homeless Coalition Council. And I've asked them personally, it has to go the same way as this one in legislation. It can change. It's up to the legislation. It's up to Guam to change and make a change on those policies. It's not impossible. And the same thing that you noted, that there will be, things that they would have to do, like take drug testing or go into treatment, and they will be in treatment and receive these services. But that was always the key deal of being as a social worker at CPS, is that I could not reunify these children. Both parents are incarcerated and based on possession, and also manufacturing. That is a no-no for anybody, for the federal. So how do we return these children? And of course, that's a long time. That's just something that is very hard to see, reunification. On the other hand, of being here a public defender, they're my clients. Majority of those, I work for the indigent clients, those who aren't able to pay for counsel. We represent them. A lot of them are all with possession charges. And the first thing, now that the attorneys are utilizing me, because it's the first social worker in public defense, and I'm supposed to present a holistic approach of client-centered, it's challenging. I'm instead of connecting, I'm hustling. I'm going to these agencies, I'm going to Guam homeless coalitions. I'm asking them, help me out, because definitely housing is tough to get for those who are coming out from jail, coming out from DOC, or the fact of even applying for, I sit with them and I help them through the process of filling out the Medicaid and SNAP applications. So overall, being there and knowing that when I'm walking with them along the side with them and being told they're not eligible, I said, prove to me they're not fully charged. They're waiting for the status of their, of their end of their court proceedings and the judgment, the sentencing. Or what if 2 years from now, the pandemic kind of put things on hold. So they're just sitting there waiting, and they've been released based on their personal recognizance, but they're not able to go back and apply for assistance. But later on, we find out 2 years later, they dropped the case, and they've been going through that whole struggle for nothing. So overall, educating, fighting, advocating for the clients that I serve under public defender, it's challenging, because of course, a lot of people are not going to look back and you're the one who committed the crime, you know, but we are getting them the services and they have completed the services. But it's just a factor that if you get a police clearance, they got a whole list, you know, and they globalize. And a lot of people say, okay, it's funny, but they will say it can consolidate all my cases, but it's called globalizing the cases there. And just really finding what the core is. And that's why I hope I can produce this section and increase social work in the public defense so we can reduce and find recidivism in the court system. So I hope I can open this door for everybody, for more social workers to come in here and focus on what the client's needs are. So this incentive is the one open door. Thank you. That's a client. So, but that's all I can say. It's I hope that you guys can give more information to public health, because they definitely know that I've been hounding on them and I've been advocating how are we going to get them. They're out there homeless. Everybody's complaining about homelessness and they're not able to apply. They're not able to even get the basic needs. So there's all, it takes a lot. And it takes a lot of us to do this. Sorry for talking too much, but you're catching me in all these sections.
No worries, Ms. Rosa. But thank you so much for giving so much insight to each presentation. And we do have 2 more questions. So one from Mr. Eric Borja.
Yeah, hi. So I'm a former recipient of SNAP program and being a convicted felon. And I had firsthand experience with this back in California. I applied for SNAP, and at first they kind of they weren't going to reject me, but they told me that they had this program that I guess so. California is one of those states that have modified it. So they had this drug addendum form. I told them I got in trouble for possession, and they still allowed me to get SNAP. I had it for many years throughout my drug treatment and all that, and all the way until I left California and I came back to Guam. And when I tried to make the attempt to apply here on Guam, they automatically barred me. The lady said, "I'm sorry, I have to deny your application." I even told her, I go, "How come I go in California? They allowed me to get SNAP," and she was like, "This is not the States, boy." So I was very disappointed and discouraged about it. And you know, I really enjoyed your guys' presentation because it really hits home for me. I'm also, well, one of my questions was, what is the degree of like the charge? Is it like if they were doing like manufacturing or distribution or like for me, I got in trouble for possession, and I know back in California, if you get in trouble for like distribution or manufacturing, they ban you from getting SNAP. But here on Guam, it's automatic. Doesn't matter, even if you are a convicted felon, they automatically ban you from it. But they still give you Medicaid, but they don't give you SNAP. So do you know, like on your research, did you find anything about the degree of charges of the individuals?
So thank you for your question, Eric. On Guam, we follow the act, the federal law, which states that it's any offense which is classified as a felony by law of the jurisdiction, and it can either be possession, use, or distribution.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and we can go ahead and take these last 2 and we'll go ahead and close out. So the first one we have here in the chat is from Kelly. Would you be willing to broaden your advocacy to include more federal offenses? I have a part-time who was just released from federal prison for theft, and he also does not qualify for SNAP.
So the initiative that we're working with right now is focused mainly on drug felons, because in the federal law, the act, they were the only ones named there that they would be banned from receiving any benefits. But personally, yes, I would be willing to advocate to include more federal offenses. But right now, the advocacy initiative with public health does not include that.
Okay, thank you. And we'll just go ahead and go with our last question. So how could a prisoner get assistance upon their releases, such as housing and how to get employed?
I think for this one, I'm just gonna put it out there, find a social worker. A social worker will definitely help you find housing and what you need. But in terms of getting assistance for SNAP and TANF, this is what we're working on through the advocacy project, and we really hope that it's something that will push through, because as we're doing our internship in our agencies, we're seeing that it's something that's really needed for our clients. So yeah. So, and Ms. Kelly also, American Job Center at GCIC for employment. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for presenting. So we'll go ahead and close this out. Dr. Diaz, did you have anything else to add before we close?
No, I'm sure the students are all relieved, and you guys did just such a great job. And I think that you should be really pleased. And
Awesome
I want to thank everyone here for contributing. Thank you, Rosa, and thank you to all of you for engaging. And there's, as you know, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to advocate for. And so every year we get to do this with the students, and as you can see, they're learning more and more. So thank you to everyone for your guidance and your mentorship and your attention. Great job, students. Rest well tonight.
Great job. Can't wait to see you guys out there.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and Dr. Diaz and to her class. So as a reminder, we do have a conference tomorrow starting at 8 again, and you can go ahead and log on the same way you logged on today, so using your customized Zoom links. But thank you, everyone, and thank you so much once again to our presenters.